We're going to look at lumber sheds, or lumber yards, I should say. This is an old lumber shed that was buried somewhere in Nebraska. We're going to start with what is timber. In the United States and Canada, milled boards are called lumber, while timber describes standing or felled trees, as you can see here. Got a bunch of logs stacked up. These probably are referred to as saw logs because they're ready to be sawed into boards or timbers. Timbers can also refer to those extremely large boards like what we see in bridges and trestles. Here an example of some timbers loaded on some flat cars. Up in British Columbia, they think they're toothpicks, but we'll just let that go. So we also have what is known as lumber. Lumber is milled wood that's processed into boards, beams, columns for structural support. And lumber can be either softwoods like cedar, pine, spruce, or hardwoods like oak, mahogany, maple, etc. And here is a load of lumber being on a flat car that's for fruit growers out in California. You notice the forklift is labeled for fruit growers. And so that's stacks of lumber on a flat car. Here's a nice end shot of a bunch of 2x6s, it looks like, stacked up as you might typically find in a lumber yard. And this is a great photo for making those blocks that you got to put into that model of the lumber yard that you're going to build after this. The other products are things like shingles. Here's a package of untreated cedar shingles and bundles of them stacked up in pallets. Of course, there's also poles. Here's some red cedar and Douglas fir poles from the Pacific Northwest being unloaded in Minneapolis back in 1956. And then, of course, we have things like pulpwood. Here's some pulpwood being loaded into a boxcar. Those of you in Wisconsin are familiar with pulpwood being loaded into gonds on flat cars or end beam or bulkhead flats. But here we are with a boxcar being loaded with pulpwood. And of course, there's the more modern concept of loading wood chips, also in boxcars. Notice the nice wood lumber doors on this boxcar, and it's a double door boxcar. So the one door probably has been sealed in place or locked in place, and the grain doors put there for the wood chips. And of course, you have other wood products such as Christmas trees, but we're not going to get to that today. Lumber, saw boards. Here we got a load of really nice timbers on a bobsled up in Wisconsin somewhere. The numbers on the ends of each of these logs represents the board feet contained in each of those logs. And you would have a man who specialized that out in the woods where they were being cut, and he had a special stick that would measure the diameter and based on the length, tell him how many how many board feet there would be contained in that log, and he would mark it accordingly. Of course, the long poles. Here we've got some especially long poles up in Washington, destined for the Ford Motor Company in New Jersey, of all places. So what they were going to do with these long poles, I don't know, probably building a factory. So, of course, logs were shipped on flat cars. These are getting some special treatment. This is an unusual photo. Normally logs are just chained on a flat car. They're not have a structure built around them. So these must be some special logs destined for somewhere. Sawmills, here's a very small one operating in southeast Iowa. Just to give you an idea of what they look like. These three photos are all the same sawmill, very primitive operations. Here's another very early sawmill in Clayton County, Iowa, which is northeast Iowa. It's got an old steam tractor in the belt drive. Of course, we had other operations. This is out in upstate Washington. They've got some former Utah coal route drop bottom gonds they're using for hauling logs, dumping them into the mill here using an overhead crane for that purpose. Here's a very large sawmill operation out in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. You can see the log pond up here. The chain would pull them up into the sawmill complex. They go through and then come out as finished lumber at the other end, stacked and the drying yards and ready to be shipped out. The slash burner there in the middle to be used for getting rid of all the sawdust and stuff. And of course, there's their dam for their mill pond. Here's another sawmill operation, again, very similar. You can find lots of photos of stuff online. So inside the sawmills, you might have a large circular saw, or maybe even have two circular saws for cutting larger logs. Most of them went with a band saw. You can see this one's got teeth on both sides. They would just, once it got dull on one side, they just pull the blade off, flop it around, and use the other side, and then change it each night. Some mills would be set up with a double band saw, and they'd slice the boards. So here is this is an interesting shot. It shows a large beam on what's called live rollers, or live roll, and this is a finished beam coming out of the sawmill and getting sent out to the sorting shed for drying and then eventually delivery. Here's another lumber mill. This is up in Minnesota. You can see they're starting to load planks into boxcars and into gonds. And then we have the smaller cars for the lumber mill operation for delivering other smaller pieces, probably lath, things of that nature over here. Here's a shot of a mill down in Texas. Similar operation, using a small cart to move lumber out to the boxcars to be loaded. You notice we got Penzi boxcar. They shipped lumber all over, so it went everywhere. Of course, where it was destined to go was our hometown lumber yard. This is a photo of the Denison and Partridge lumber yard in Waukee, Iowa, which is now a big suburb of Des Moines. And notice we got a typical lumberyard building with a center alleyway, and you would have bins on either side. There's a small office up front. And of course, they had the delivery truck, even with the phone number 12. So here is a lumber yard out in Harrodsburg, California. And what's interesting here is you can see the variety of all the bins with all the variety of wood loaded into it, ready for you to come and select what you want. Each bin would have a different size, so that you might have 2x4s, of certain length, say 8 foot. Next to it might be 2x4s and 10 foot. Next to that might be 2x4s, 12 foot, and on down the way. And then you get into the 2x6s, 2x8s, 2x12s, etc. The upper decks often was the lighter weight stuff. Might be the 1x instead of the 2x. It might be millwork, trim, things of that nature, and so on. This lumber yard also had their own saw shed, only theirs was out in the open, being California. Looks like we've got a lot of redwood going through this mill. Harrodsburg might be up in Northern California redwood territory. So here is a Wisconsin. I couldn't pronounce the name if I wanted to try. I'll let you Michigan guys do that. But you see the office and the sheds for the lumber coal sheds here, and then we've got another big shed here for the inside storage. So this is an aerial photo of my hometown, and I threw it in because you can see you get two railroad depots up here visible. So there were two railroads, but you have two lumber yards. This is one lumber yard. This is the other lumber yard. Notice this one in the back, and we've got stacks of timbers. Probably we got a couple bins with no doubt sand, perhaps for cement and concrete work. Looks like we got stacks of brick and tile, all typical items that a lumber yard would sell. And you can see right here on the label says cement and roofing, etc. This lumber yard, it's all enclosed. Now, this is that northern one I was showing you, the Green Bay Lumber Company. They had a center aisle down the middle. They had bins on either side. I remember going into this as a kid. This is the other lumber yard. They had a small office shed, and they had open stacks. This is a very early photo. Here's another photo. You can see a covered shed here, and then just stacks and stacks and stacks of lumber with the early courthouse there visible. Here it is with the newer building, and this was a playhouse they had built for some purpose in the 50s, and some kids that I went to school with apparently had this in there. They won it in a raffle or whatever, and it was in their backyard, and they played in it for years. You see the sewer pipe over here, and their building material: brick, tile, lime, cement, roofing, all the items you would need for constructing homes and businesses. Here's the other side of that same lumberyard building. Notice we've got some open sheds here. We got some doors that were apparently hung like barn doors so you could open and close this area. We got snow on the ground, so this is open. Looks like it's about empty when they're getting ready to tear it down. When I was a kid, they tore this down, built a Fairway grocery store on that spot. So this is the lumberyard that used to stand in Colo, Iowa, where I lived until this summer. Very typical what we see here in the Midwest, a large building, very barn looking, with a shed basically on either side of a center aisle. And then you got some offices and other apparatus here on the side that could be used for storage or offices, etc. So again, here's another example. This one's down in Kansas. You get the center aisle going through. This one looks like it's just getting built. You have a front office here, and then the wings on either side where the bins were located for storing all those long sticks of lumber. In the upper section, you would have overhead walkways and also bins. This is where they stored the really lightweight stuff like rolls of insulation, roofing paper, that type of thing. So this one is in Hull, Iowa, but I want you to notice here, notice how this wing on this side is wider than this wing on this side. And you can tell two ways. Also, the roof pitch is different, even though they both are at the same height. The pitch is different because this one's a narrower width. This was because, you know, you don't need a full 24-inch wide wing to store 2x4 studs that are only 8 feet long. So you did to store the shorter lumber on one side, the longer sticks went on the other side. So you didn't have to build as much building and as much roof for storing your lumber. Notice also they sold coal at this spot. So a lot of our hometown lumber yards sold more than lumber. They sold, you know, the coal, the roofing materials, fencing materials, things you needed for plaster like lime, etc. Let's look at some shots of some early lumber yards. This one, I was looking for these because I wanted to do something with the Atlas kit. And I was looking for something in the Midwest that had the open sheds like the Atlas kit. This is in Dyersville, Iowa, 1910. Notice the slatted gate for locking in the lumberyard to secure it for night. He had the office. This would be lumber storage shed, lumber storage shed. This is an enclosed building, probably for storing things like bags of cement, lime, shingles, that type of thing. Here's a typical layout of a lumberyard along the tracks. You got the grain elevator here, the office, and then there's the lumber shed right over there. There could be a track running beside it, or they may just be unloading from the team track right here behind the office and then carting the lumber over into the shed. This is Applington, Iowa, 1910. Applington's up around the Waterloo area. Here's another setup. This is down in Texas on the Katy. Notice that picket fence type of gate that slides along to close off the yard, the office, the open sheds, the closed building. But of course, they sold a lot more than just lumber. As you can see, this one is, boy, they got all kinds of stuff here: paint, shingles, siding, roofing materials, fencing, flower boxes, trellises, 1936 prices. And it looks like a little shed, garden shed or something being built here, and stacks of timber. So these could be very busy places selling all kinds of stuff. Here's another one, an Aspinwall. I'm not sure where that's at, but as you can see, here's the open shed in the closed building, track there for unloading. This is Robinson, Iowa, about 1910, another postcard. Tracks are right over here on the far left side. Notice this building here, tied in with the grain elevator company. You got a coal shed here. This might have been for storage for supplies like fencing materials or for roofing or for bags of cement. Then you got the open lumber shed back here, and of course the office building. This is Canal, Iowa. This is 1913. We got a grain elevator. This could be the depot here in the office. We got stacks of of looks like cement block or concrete blocks. We got some cement or clay tile. But here is what that lumber, excuse me, let's go back again. Here's the Canal lumber yard. You can see they got an open shed, they got a fenced in area. They got stacks of material outside, and then you've got the drive-through alley in the middle, and they got lumber stacked up inside. So this photo really caught my eye because we got two Iowa Central stock cars in the foreground, which of course that name disappeared in 1912. So, and their photos of their stock cars very rare. So this is Melvin, Iowa. Again, in a lumberyard. Look at all the stuff sitting outside. We got stacks of stuff. This is probably looks like all fencing posts stacked up. We probably got maybe rolls of wire fencing and other things laying here. Maybe some gates, some longer poles. We got the standard enclosed shed with the open sides. Just give you some modeling ideas. Here's an example. This is, I'm not sure which Milton it is, but Milton Foreman, lumber, lime, cement, lath, hardware, paint. Notice the upper and lower doors that slide open and close so you can get to what you're purchasing or what they're unloading from the tracks that are over here. So this is in down in Texas. Again, notice the open sheds, the slant roofs, the slant back. You got an upper walkway here so that the lumberyard guy can go through and pull off what you requested and toss it down so it'd be loaded in your wagon or your truck. And the same process also happened when they were restocking after selling stuff, that they would off the trucks or wagons and up, shove it up and into the sheds. This one's a brick construction. This looks like it's probably a concrete block wall. The office looks like it's concrete block. So here's a nice wood building. The wings here look like they're the same width, but we got building products stacked up inside the small office. It said printing, so they must have been doing some, run a little printing office. You can see it goes back about 4 windows. Here's a nice big lumber facility in Corona, California. We got bins that go 4 high, stacked with all kinds of material, and a whole crew there waiting to help you. This is Millard Lumber in Omaha in the 50s, and they've got a nice open lumberyard access here, as well as the closed building. And of course, they had their own grain company all attached to us. You'll find this in smaller communities, especially that the lumberyard might be tied in with the grain elevator or the coal dealer, might even be the fuel dealer. They just handled almost anything and everything. Okay, this is Pearson, Iowa. Notice we got the office here, the fellow standing out here on the scale. We got some sewer pipe sections standing here. Notice the well there for their water supply. Stacks of larger boards or timbers. We got the enclosed building, and of course all the stuff stacked up there. Redfield, Iowa, 1912. They have got it all closed up for the winter. But again, there's the fence. You got the sliding door to get inside the building. This is Rippey, Iowa. Very similar. Look at all the rolls of fencing stacked and the gates for people's front yards when they fenced in the front yards, and the small office operation in the center aisle. So Riverside, Iowa, 1905. Again, a fence. You got the open bins, the small office building, a nice sliding gate that slid on these overhead rails. This is Grinnell, Iowa. Clark Lumber. Neponset Roofings. So there's a sign for, if that was in color, boy, I could print that out and put it on my lumberyard, right? So this is St. Charles, Iowa. Here we've got the open shed bins back here. Closed. We've got, who knows what's getting unloaded here, because we got a stock car and a box car and a gun, a pile of stuff on the ground. But you just got stacks of all the typical building materials lying around. And it was adjacent to the tracks. Let's see, this is Alpha, Illinois. This is on the CB&Q and right off the Mississippi River in western central Illinois. Non-sag gate steels for sale by Alexander Lumber Company. So that was you might carry stuff like that and you'd have a sample on display to show your farmers that you had good products. So this is Dyersville, Iowa. Got the grain elevator, so you know the railroad's right around there. There's a lumber yard here and another lumber yard here. Armstrong's lumber office, coal, brick, lime, and cement. The teams of horses here ready to pick up supplies. Anamosa Lumber Company, again, the shed with the two wings, center aisle, and a small office building with the scale out front. This is in Alma, Kansas. This is interesting because it's built on a slope, and so the sheds are stair step going down the slope. But again, we have the gate that slides across the opening when you want to lock it up at night. A nice screen door on the front door. You can buy lime, hair cement, all kinds of good stuff here. Avoca Lumber Company. There's that obligatory gate, an open shed of some sort back there for storing lumber products. The office. Lauraville, Iowa, lumber, lime, cement, stucco, coal, sash, and doors. You know, you could buy everything. And this was the Home Depot of its day. So, Lake Mills, Iowa, Farmer Lumber Company is again the big open shed. This is a really big one because we got a long roof. We've got stacks of fencing here. A sliding door over the small shed where they're storing the fencing supplies, lumber in here, a center office. These offices, if they carried paint, they carried hardware, they carried, tools, all those things. You could go in there and get whatever you needed for building projects. So this is Hinton, Iowa. This is just north of Sioux City. Big building. It's got a center aisle driveway through here and then another side one. Coal bins back here, the lumber yard there, or the grain elevator, excuse me. So I like this one. This is Corbin Lumber. It's in Kansas somewhere. A nice open shed. We got a fenced in area where they're storing probably sewer pipe and fencing, rolls of fencing, etc. And you got the standard storefront office. Probably could buy your paint, nails, all that type of stuff in there. And Ryan, I have no idea where they are, but they sure got some nice looking trucks sitting out in front of their nicely painted and decorated lumberyard and office complex. So Stewart, Denison, it looks like this is the same as the Green Bay in my hometown of Indianola, same end of the building there. So, and this is Lake Park, Iowa, which is clear up by the Okoboji area, and they've got notice that they have the open walkway, but they've got sliding doors covering up their bins so that things could be better protected from the weather. And we got piles of snow around there. This one is in El Paso, Texas, but obviously they're not using it for lumber at the moment because it says a bunch of Mormons are living in the lumber yard. I'm not sure I want to know what the story is behind that. It's an interesting photo all the same. This is in Topeka, Kansas. Bonner Portland Cement, Gillette Nicholson, the company. Carbon Coke, coal. Looks like we got a Red Cross for first aid information. The wagons here ready to be loaded up and to deliver stuff. So, and this is Iowa Park, Texas, Mayfield Lumber Company. Again, you got the stacks of fence posts. You got the open bin shed. You get a barn or closed building here for things. You got the office and the picket fence gates. These are hinged, so they swing open and close. And of course, the railroad tracks where everything came in and could be unloaded right here. So this is in Colorado, Johnstown Lumberyard, 1921. You got a burro crane of some sort here, and just stacks and stacks of plank lumber. You also have a clamshell bucket, no doubt for the crane, probably was used to unload things like coal and and other products that might come in a open gun. Looks like we also got some sort of a steam boiler sitting here. So now here's a shot in Chicago where they're unloading boxcars onto wagons, and they're also stacking lumber up. And notes that a separate crew and foreman for each car. So they've had a string of cars come in and they're busy unloading them into their yards, with 5 loading tracks in their lumber yard. So this is a big operation. This is one McIlvaine Company in Philadelphia. This is inside their building. Here's the center aisle. Notice the tracks that they can bring rail cars in, the trucks and wagons. And look how high these boards are stacked. How'd you like to be the guy climbing up there to pull off the 2x6 for Mrs. Smith when she comes in, because her husband sent her to get a board? I'm amazed at how high they stacked it. So here's an open air historical lumber yard. I don't know the location. You can see they got 3 aisles in their lumber shed, open storage, and then lots of stuff stacked outside. This is Charlotte lumber somewhere in the 30s. You got some stuff stacked up outside, and you got a closed shed here, or a roofed over, and auto box cars, which were very common for shipping lumber in. And I'll show you why in a moment. Of course, once the lumber got to the lumber yard, how do you get it to where it's going? Here we got a team set up. They're set up for a quick delivery. I imagine all this guy had to do was unhook this tie down and throw a lever, and the whole thing slid right off onto the ground. So, or you had a couple guys come along and they handled it. Notice they're wearing their nice leather gloves. They handled these planks one at a time, unloading from the boxcar, loading up on the wagon. So, of course, this is how lumber yards delivered the stuff. They only sent one guy out in the truck, and I don't know how he got the truck to buck like that, but probably what he did was backed up and slammed on the brakes real hard, and the load just started sliding off. Back up. I'm going too fast here. Here's the same lumber company, a different truck doing the same maneuver. And I've seen them do this. Even when I was a teenager, I saw them unload like this. So it's the whole bundle is all stacked together. So basically, surprisingly, nothing broke. Once in a while, they would just replace if it got broken. But this is DeLue and Sons out of Holland, Michigan. So somebody in our group, I think, knows where that's at. So, and here's what their operation looked like: stacks of lumber. Somebody's been sorting through the pile. You can tell that. And look at the stack of shingles wrapped in paper there, and then covered over so they don't get weather damaged, with some tar paper and a couple cement blocks sitting on top. This is Edgewood, Iowa, in 1920. What I like is look at the horse trough sitting up here on the upper level. Remember how I said lighter weight stuff would be stored up there? You got other things stashed in there, but it's just sitting up out of the way until someone comes to get it. Probably been ordered for them. Loading lumber or unloading lumber. These guys are handling it one at a time. This fellow here is the supervisor at counter. There will be a guy inside the car. He's picking up each stick of lumber, sending it out through the door on this roller. And the guy on the outside on the stack grabs it off the roller, and he starts stacking it on the wagon. When they got lumber that was longer than, say, about 16 or 18 feet, the guy inside would use what was called the lumber door at the end of the car. He would have that open, and he could stick the long piece he was picking up out that door just enough so he could angle it through the side door to this guy in the wagon. That's the purpose of those lumber doors. But notice that this roller is mounted on a bar, and they were on clamps, and they could raise that up, start at the top of the car, and work their way down. And that's how 2 guys could unload a whole boxcar of lumber. So here's another shot. They don't have a roller, but you can see how they're stacking it up in here and handling it. You also got a couple of rolls of roofing paper and some other architectural stuff, and maybe some bundles of lath or whatever. So this might be an order coming to the location. And then this is a photo from Camp Dix where they're unloading lumber on both sides of the cars. So here we got basically a teenager who's doing the work on the inside and guys on the outside, and they're handling smaller stuff, it looks like. That was, let's see, where was that? Burlington, Vermont, 1910. This is Washington, D.C., 1926, where we're loading up lumber in a lumber yard. Some new modern places had indoor spurs for unloading lumber, and here we got a double door boxcar. Stuff is all wrapped and palleted for forklifts, and we got the platform in place for unloading on the inside of this building. This is an outside loading area. This fellow's got I can't think of what they're called right at the moment. Heisler made a bunch of them, but they used them for moving lumber. They had grappling hooks that were on a hinge. The operator could flip a lever and the hook would swing underneath this load on either side, and then he could lift it up and move it anywhere he wanted to, then drop it down. You can see everything sitting up on 4x4s or something similar, so he could do that. Notice the open sheds behind him, and every stack is basically the same size planks or lumber pieces, and every stack is different. So this is an interesting shot. This is says it's 1 million board feet of lumber destined for Paramount Studios in Los Angeles. Look at all the trucks lined up here, all loaded with lumber, blocking the highway. That's a lot of lumber. So again, unloading a boxcar. These guys have a truck. There's 2 of them, piece by piece, stacking it up. They'll drive it to the lumber yard, unload it piece by piece, and put it in those bins. Then when you or I show up to purchase a couple of pieces of 2x6, they will go to the bin and pull them out, handle them once again. So if in the earlier days, they did it with horse and wagon. This is in Waterloo, Iowa, with lumber that came in on a couple of New York Central auto box cars. They liked the auto box cars because they had the double doors, which made it easier for unloading. Of course, some lumber was handled at seaports. Here we got a shot in Seattle with a Northern Pacific Gone, loaded up with a bunch of square timbers, it appears, and then bags of material, and they're loading or offloading on a ship. So here's a string of lumber probably coming out of Northern California, Oregon, and Southern Pacific cars, or Sacramento Northern cars. We got guns and flat cars, and it's just all stacked up and tied down. This is in Ogden, Utah in 1947. A whole train load headed east. This is Chicago Northwestern cars and Milwaukee cars being unloaded in 1912. And this is what lumber piles look like along the tracks. This is somewhere in California with a Great Northern car. So this came down from the Pacific Northwest with, look at the bundles of lath, the stack of 2x4s it looks like, and then we got looks like some 2x12s or maybe even 16s in there and other stuff. There's another one in Michigan with a horse team and a Gone, unloading the Gone. Here we are unloading a boxcar. Notice how he's got the brace across there. Yeah, I don't see the roller, but he's sliding the lumber across that brace onto his wagon. And here you can see how they're loading it. This guy has got a pedestal. And what these guys, they're not doing anything. They're just wearing hats and checking clipboards. But this guy here, what he does is he picks up a board on one end, swings it over onto this pedestal, and then pushes down and then swings it at the same time to the guy at the door. And as he pushes down, he lifts it up above this bar where the roller is. He also pivots it on this pedestal so it goes in the door. This guy can then grab it, slide it on in on this brace. And while he's doing that, this guy goes and grabs the next board, gets it in place, and they just set up a continuous operation of loading this boxcar with what looks like 1x12s. And this is in Oregon in 1938. And of course, this is what they look like after they arrive at your lumberyard. many box cars would be of lumber would be, it would be noted to unload this side only. And this is, if you open the wrong side of the wrong door, this is what you might see. And you might send one guy up there in the top, he might spend half the day just getting one or two boards out enough so that you could start to untangle the mess. Notice there's a few boards on the ground, so they've started the process. But loads, boards were not all consistent in length like we see today. They would load all random lengths in these cars, and if they shifted at all, that's what they looked like. So, and of course, this is sometimes how the unloading process happened. You can see they got stacks of lumber of same length, different lengths in here, and they got the brace across the door. They've slowly been tossing it out. They're just tossing it on the side here in 1920. Here we've got, it says loading plywood panels. These are probably pre-cut for a specific order or purchaser, but they're still being handled by hand. They're not all bundled in tight bundles. So he's just picking up a handful and stacking them in the car in 1924. This is Eugene, Oregon in 1943. We got gongs with logs in here going to the sawmills. We got flat cars with big timbers and planks. We've got a gon here with big timbers. We got flat cars with poles on them. So this was, typical of what you would see in lumber territories such as Oregon. And of course, the large timbers. Here we got 3 timbers spanning a couple of flat cars. There was a sawmill out in Oregon that I visited one time on a NMRA convention tour that could saw up to 86-foot length timbers like this. They were equipped, their table could handle 86-foot length for sawing timbers. Unbelievable. And it was all steam powered. It was fascinating to watch. So anyway, here's another load of large timbers spanning 2 flat cars. Here's a gon, a New York Central gon, a Great Southern Lumber Company of Louisiana. And we've got a bunch of timbers on there. We're ready to go somewhere. Here's a Frisco gon loaded with what looks like 2x6s, maybe 2x8s loaded in there. We got the uprights here, a double strap, and then wire across the top. The wire would just be wrapped around the other one, and then they would twist it to tighten the load. And hopefully it didn't shift in the process of moving. Here's a flat car, a similar operation. You see they got stickers stuck down in the, oops, I keep hitting my mouth, but sorry. See the stickers stuck down in the stake pockets. And notice the random lengths of, you got a bundle here, you got a bundle there, then you got 2 longer bundles stuck. Then you got a third bundle straddling these 2, and another bundle here, and another, then some more loose pieces up here. And it's all, I'm not sure it's all tied down together completely. And sometimes these loads did shift. And you want to know what happens when they shifted? Well, they went to a yard, and this apparatus right here is a lumber load. It would realign those shifted loads. You'd run the car through there, and they had ways of shoving the loads back in square with the flat car of the gon. This is somewhere in the yard out in California. But those large yards that handled lots of timber and lumber had things like this for doing that. Now here's a lumber yard in Washington State. You've got a lot of timber that's drying. They have stickers between these loads, and notice how they slant so the rain will run off and not sit there and soak into the wood. And of course, old Dobbin with his 2-wheel cart hauling stuff around. This is Bennington, Nebraska, where they're unloading lumber out of a box car. This is a McAlvin lumber wagons in Philadelphia. They would deliver any size, and notice how the loads are slanted so that they could slide right off the back of the wagon. So this guy who went out to make the delivery would probably just release a chain or something, and the load would all slide off for him. This is their, again, another shot of their operation. Look at the stacks of lumber. So Here's the Chesapeake and Ohio using their burro crane uh, for unloading some flat cars of lumber. Let's see, Morehouse, Missouri, lumber mill office. So, and here are their stacks. This was a lumber operation and they were milling and drying. This is their drying yard. So, see a Frisco car back there waiting to be loaded. This is a sawmill lumber yard. Again, lumber out here on these two-wheeled carts, balanced on one end, is getting ready to be loaded into all these waiting box cars. So, and of course, as trucks came into being, they began using trucks. This is the Western Red Cedar Mill, somewhere out in Oregon. And here you see the stickered wood. It's got stickers like 1x2s in between here, so the airflow could dry out this lumber that's in the drying yard. But now they're stacking it on the truck. You don't see any stickers here except for, once in a while. And that was so if they had a forklift, they could actually lift the whole bundle up. And these guys are getting ready to drive their international truck to the loading site on the Pacific Great Eastern, and they're going to load all this Western red cedar into this box car. And you see this fellow's he's undoing the chain, and then he's unloaded the truck. So, and then this guy here, he's waiting there on the brace. He's waiting for somebody to stand on this stack once the truck pulls out and start shoving boards into him. And notice the lumber door is open. So these extra long pieces, as they come in, you can shove them out that door and get them aligned inside the box car. So now here we got another Shelbyville Desk Company, wherever that's at. Probably in Texas, getting lumber. This is in Washington, D.C. in a yard there. And we got a Florida East Coast ventilated or watermelon car, as we might call it, where they're unloading lumber right in the yard into a waiting truck. And we got a gun here with a load of lumber as well. Here we are unloading lumber out of a southern boxcar. Look at the size of those planks. You just can't buy those anymore. Millersburg, Michigan, loading lumber up into a gon in the middle of snowy weather. Here's an SP lumber train up in Oregon in 1948. Gon and flat, just stacked with flat boards. And again, SP, here we got a gon flat car loaded with lumber and timber stacked nearby. Again, a couple of flats with some large timbers and a lot of dimensional lumber. And here you can see mixed load. We got some larger timbers, smaller timbers. We got, looks like 2x6s next to 4xs with some 6 or 8xs. So, and this one was fairly tight and consistent. So this is one where they've used some cross bracing to secure the load so it doesn't shift on them. Here we're moving some longer timber. I like this sticks on rail. They're over 2 flat cars because one flat car was not long enough to handle what they're shipping. Again, here we got this fellow is using a stick to measure the boards to see if they're what have been ordered or so they know what pile to go into. Here he's also got his measuring stick, and these guys are starting to, not sure if they're loading or unloading, but it's a mess. This says they're unloading fence material, but I don't know who builds fence with stuff like this. Some pretty big timbers there. Another fellow unloading his truck. Another boxcar getting unloaded. I've collected too many of these photos. This is International Harvester in Chicago, getting a load of lumber for building wagons, etc. So, here we got a Pennsylvania boxcar out in Poston, Arizona. These guys do a nice job of stacking it up as they unload this boxcar. This is what we're more accustomed to seeing, is the bulkhead center beam flat. This one's got neat stacks of lumber that have all been banded and stacked up in lengths so that they fit on on this flat car. Here we see a big forklift unloading. And these have not been covered with plastic wrap or tarps, this is more typical of what we see today, is all wrapped up in plastic so it doesn't get weather damaged. Sheet goods like plywood, wallboard, etc., get loaded into box cars using a forklift. Again, those wide double door cars are really popular for this kind of work. Now, what led me to dig up all this stuff was I had this model of an Atlas lumber yard, and I wanted to know what I could do with it. Actually, I had several of these. And so I decided to do some kit bashing. And here you can see some of the cuts I made. I removed the office, took away this platform here and cut it off at this end square, removed the stuff on the other end. This is one that was somebody had given me. And I removed the roof and shifted it over so it could sit flush at this end. And of course, here's the backside is, where I made some cuts and took this outside wall, moved it all the way in, getting rid of this particular platform. And this is where I took two of them and joined them together using some styrene beams, and actually made this open area larger with by using two of these kits. And here's the workbench. I've already painted this. I've used a piece of styrene here. This is where that workbench used to be on the one end of one. Use a styrene filler here so I could add a 2-story building to make an office. And this is the result. This is a fruit and lumber company in the town of Ackley, Iowa on my layout. And you can recognize the two Atlas kits that I used, but they're a little bit different. We've got a larger area here where a truck could be parked, but you've got the workbench and the saw there for cutting pieces up for customers' needs. As a little kid, I can remember going into that one lumber yard and asking for scraps, and they always sent me back to the saw area. And there was a guy back here with a barrel or a box of scraps, and he'd say, "Yeah, go help yourself." And so I'd dig in that box and come away with a few boards to go home and play with my new hammer. So this platform down here would be typically used for shingles, roofing paper, bags of cement, that type of stuff. You can see the bins I've got. Actually, these are solid blocks of wood, and I've used those photos of the ends of 2x6s and 2x4s and stuff, and just printed them out on a color printer and glued them on to the end of a solid block of wood. And it looks like this lumber yard is fully equipped. And that's the end of what I've got.
Very nice.
Hope you learned a little bit about lumber.
That was a fantastic presentation, Doug. Really loved it.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a passion for lumber operations. My grandfather grew up way up in Northern California in the Redwood territory. And I've been out there a few times and toured some sawmills and lumber yards. I've collected a lot of books on it. And any chance I get, I don't model any logging operations, but anytime I get a chance to see a layout that's got logging, I'll do it because it just fascinates me. So
your collection of photos, a phenomenal collection of horse-drawn wagons and variety. That in itself is a whole different topic.
Yes. Well, a lot of them during the teens and 20s, photographers went out and they took photos and made postcards that sold to local businesses of their businesses. And so a lot of those photos are 1910 to 1925 postcards. And the horse-drawn wagons were the common means of moving that stuff. And so, my wife grew up with horses, so horses are another subject of interest. I know
every one of the wagons was a different configuration, like they were homemade or something.
Well, there were a number of different companies. International Harvester was just one who made wagons, and they all used lumber in the process.
I was paying attention also to the horses and their rigging.
Yes, the harnessing and the
harnessing and the rigging.
Yep. And you saw a lot of them were wearing what was called a fly cover. That was a kind of rope or braided cover, and that was to keep the flies from bothering them in the summertime. So.
Yeah. Hey Doug, I was gonna say, you had that one photo with the saw outside.
Yes.
I don't know about Iowa or other parts of the country, but in Minnesota, again, same thing. My grandfather worked in my one lumber yard. I had a grandfather who actually had a small sawmill. But I was going to say, in the lumber yards in Minnesota, that saw that you had outside, many of them, used it primarily for ripping or
Yes.
cutting the length. But in Minnesota, they were all inside and had to be, because in the early years, many were belt driven, and therefore they could not get wet, and or those belts would break. So most all those type of saws. So a lot of times they were in a small individual building. In some of the photos you showed, different buildings, probably some of them contain that type of saw setup.
Yeah, it's almost all the lumber yards that I've ever been into has had an alcove, like I built into my model, that had a radial arm saw, typically off on one side on a bench where they could cut stuff to length for customers, or if they were building feed bunks or other things, that's where they put the guys when they weren't busy dealing with customers. Go cut some boards and start building another feed bunk because we just sold 3 of them, type of thing. So yeah, and they were typically inside. That one was in California where everything's always outside. So, but yeah, saws would be inside because you didn't want the snow in the wintertime and the rain in the summertime to disrupt
Sure.
your work. Yeah.
Well, and especially if they were belt driven.
Oh, a good point. Yes. Very good. So. Well, you guys just went through 150
Good
slides.
fun.
So.
Yeah. There were a few of them from Texas, which I appreciated. And one of them was in Dyersville, like Texas, which
Yes.
actually exists still. It's very, very close to the Louisiana border. I had to look it up. It's close to the Louisiana border in the Pineywood part of Texas. And I noticed that the main road through town is US Highway 59, which is named Temple Drive. So thanks for that one.
Oh. Well, when you go surfing on the internet, you just don't know what's going to pop up on your screen. And sometimes it's some pretty obnoxious stuff.
Yeah.
But I still save a lot of it when it's a subject I'm interested in.
Hey.
But yeah, so you saw a lot of what I found.
Then there was that other place called Iowa. Yeah. Then there was a place called Iowa Park, Texas.
Yes.
I had to look that up because I was trying to figure out, well, where the heck is Iowa Park? And it's it's just to the west of Wichita Falls, which is northwest of Dallas. We're almost on the Red River, Oklahoma border. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know how it got its name, of course, but I figured you guys might be interested in Iowa Falls or Iowa Park.
Well, I appreciate.
I was trying to figure out where it was. I never heard of it.
Yeah, I think he had a picture from Cleveland, just south of where I am in Wisconsin there. And it had a little cart that would unload cars that were perpendicular to this little narrow gauge track. And I got that from one of the historical societies in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't always know the location of photos when I find them. I try to save that when I can, but and a lot of especially the sawmills, they often had small narrow gauge operations. Some of them might only be 18 or 24 inch wide for moving product around within there, because depending on how they were set up, saw logs would come in, go through the bandsaw or the circular saw, be sliced up into boards, and then it would go into a resaw, a trim saw, a planing operations, etc. And then they might go out on carts, some of the carts were on tracks where they'd be moved out to the loading area or the drying area, the sorting sheds, etc. A lot of lumber today is kiln drying, so it's put on a little wheeled cart and rolled into a kiln where it's heated up for 18, 24 hours to dry it out. But if you go into Menards and sort through the stacks of 2x4s, you find an awful lot of wet lumber.
Well, I can tell you, I used to live by only a few blocks on the MNS from Thompson Lumber at one time. And in the earlier years, those flats it mostly was flats would come in. Loads
Call
were
you back in a minute.
Loads were as dry as could be,
Zoom
but
meeting.
in later years, those loads would come
Oh,
in. It was like a
Okay.
rainstorm.
Never mind.
I wanted to
I'll go in the other room. Just wait a second.
I was just gonna say, in later years, those flats would come in with those lumber loads that were supposedly kiln dry, and it was like a rainstorm underneath the flat car.
Yeah. I didn't touch, I mentioned hardwoods, but I really didn't touch into that. That stuff is what is handled a little bit differently.
Yep.
And very much kiln dried and protected inside boxcars. And whereas the more dimensional stuff we might use for framing a house or a barn typically was shipped in open cars because they weren't as concerned about it. But hardwoods would always be shipped inside a boxcar and enclosed car and very well protected. So.
Well, you can't buy a red piece of redwood today. Pretty
You
difficult.
you can, but you just gotta have a lot of money.
Well, California doesn't export it anymore even. They quit
Not hard.
exporting again. They did for a while, then they changed it and they let it export. Now they stopped exporting, I believe, a couple of years ago again. But yeah, there are places you can buy it, but pretty expensive.
Yep.
Doug,
Yeah, Mike.
thank you very much. I got to cut you guys off because my graduate class is going to start. And
That's
I got to get over there. But thanks, everybody. I look forward to hearing this. I had to mute most of the time. I was on this other meeting, but I'm looking forward to hearing it myself. And thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Greg, can you call me back sometime when you get a minute? Is he still there?
Who?
Greg.
Sure, I'll call you. I'll call you, Rich.
Yeah, you can call me tomorrow or something, whatever it's
Okay.
convenient.
All right.
Good.
We'll do.
Good
Thank you.
night.
All right, see you guys. Thanks.